Hello and welcome to another episode of the Elevation Association Experience podcast. We are your host, Dr. Jared Hill. I'm Dr. Dan Nelson. Welcome back. Today we are diving into some of the yucky, nasty cesspool world of insurance. And I don't know, Jared. I think this is probably a topic we could cover every week.
Yeah, no, it's something especially I think at the forefront of minds right now. There's been quite a few happenings, if you will, within the world and realm of dentistry and insurance companies. We've had a lot of conversations with a lot of people regarding their plans, what they're doing with their plans, and so I think it's at the forefront of a lot of everybody's mind. And I thought it'd be a great episode for us to do today. Dan gave a great webinar on this. If you want to go to school.com and under Elevation Association, you can get a great webinar that Dan's going to put up. But anyway, it's for those who missed it. I thought we'd do a podcast just to recap a lot of the topics we talked about because this is important. And Dan and I are current practicing dentists. We think that's important. We are navigating the storm that everybody else is navigating regarding this insurance, and so we are currently in the process of exiting Delta, and that's our last insurance that we are contracted with. And so we're going through it just like everybody else is. We've got the same thoughts and fears and troubles and excitement and all the range of emotions that everybody has going through this. And so this will be a good episode, I think, to go over. We'll go over the current landscape. We'll talk about what's currently happening in the industry. We'll talk about the cost of staying in network, like the real costs. We'll talk about those emotions and feelings, kind of the myth of, oh, I'm going to lose all my patients. We'll talk about planning for the best, but expecting the worst. But how to deal with that. We'll talk a little bit about some strategies, what you guys should do. We'll talk about some support of if you decide to leave insurance companies, how you can find the support that you need. And then we'll talk about what it's like on the other side of the storm. So we'll address those topics today, and hopefully this will be useful and you can use it as a resource, maybe something you can come back to and listen to and share with your other dental friends who are maybe considering some of these topics.
Well, I think maybe the best segue into to jump right into this is to talk about the email that I got a couple of weeks ago, and I'm sure I'm not alone. Anybody that subscribes to the email that I was getting would get this news, and it was that Delta Dental has officially purchased dental offices. This happened in Wisconsin. They purchased a group practice, and this is an unprecedented move. The report said that the ADA has not decided what to do and they're on edge, I guess, is what the gist of the report was, is that they're concerned that this has occurred and they have yet to make any moves up to this point. So that alone should be a wake-up call to everybody that's in private practice. This is a huge, well, just everyone that's in practice in general. This is a huge shift. This is akin to what happened to the medical industry 40 years ago. So kind of a big deal, kind of a interesting. Jared, hold on, we gotta pause this, man. So the bottom line is that this may be an introduction to a change in the dental landscape as well, and just the way that things are structured and how insurance will work. I don't know. It's hard to predict for sure, but the bottom line is it's unprecedented, and certainly there's writing on the wall about changes that are coming. If you look at the dental industry as a whole, if we look at the landscape, the dental industry profits about 5 to 6 billion a year. That's what their profits are. Revenue is higher than that, but their actual profitability is 5 to 6 billion with a B. And they do have a good gig, and who can fault them, right? It's a business. This is what they're intended to do. Businesses are intended to be profitable. We're going to talk about that when it comes to our own profitability. That's it's not a bad thing, but it's also a choice. You don't have to be in network. You don't have to take every insurance under the sun and sign every contract that comes across your desk, and sign your soul away to this, discounted fees and working harder for less and all of that. And some things that are important to note, and we talked about this in that webinar, is that there are some big insurance companies that have had no significant reimbursement increases in since 2004, which is insane if you think about that for a second. And then you compound that with the current dental benefit model for the patients, where it's the $1,000, $1,500 benefit, or the coupon that I like to call it. That began in the 70s and hasn't changed or gone up since the 70s. So if I'm a consumer, if I'm a patient, I'm calling going, hey, why haven't you guys increased my benefit at all? I pay a lot more than I used to. My benefit's the same and you're paying the docs less. I would be pretty frustrated, that my coverage is crappy, that I don't get good coverage. And that now they're pigeonholing isn't the patients into having to go and do cut rate things. On top of that, and this was something that was crazy, I had a phone call with an insurance company last week, and what they said is they're going to restructure their current um, billing process, where they will have their reimbursement fee, and that will be considered a base. And you can use whatever product that you feel is a base product. And when it comes to composites and some other things, I can't even wrap my head around this. And then if you want to charge a upcharge for a more premium or a normal product, then you are talking about you can add a 29.99 code, and you can charge whatever you want over that. So their workaround for not increasing their reimbursements is just putting it on the offices, putting it on the docs and saying, okay, well, why you guys can charge more, but you're going to have to submit this new claim, and you're going to have to tell the patient that this is an upcharge for a more premium service or premium product. Well, for us in our office, Jared, we can't even wrap our head around this, because that's like what they're asking us to do is to offer subpar care and then charge additional fees just to get our regular up to our normal standard. So it blows my mind.
Yeah, in short, the PPO write-offs are quietly draining your practice profits. Like you said, over the years, they haven't increased reimbursement rates, and they haven't really increased the benefit rate for the patient. So our costs have gone up. Have your costs gone up since 2004? Absolutely. Have they gone up just in the last year or a couple of years, especially since COVID? Absolutely. So they're quietly draining these practice profits. Here's a real story from a dentist that we talked to from Orem, Utah, who said, as we were discussing this issue and this problem, he said he had contracted with a company, to negotiate the fees of his insurance company, because it had been so long since they had changed his reimbursement model. And when he tried to negotiate with them, not only did they come back and say, no, we're not going to renegotiate, they actually gave him a lower fee reimbursement schedule. To me, that's a kick in the gut right there. Not only are they saying, we're not interested in our current partnership, is we're not interested in a future partnership. This is the bigger, broader, the current landscape of insurance and dentistry. As you were talking about, the insurance companies have started to buy practices. Well, they're just going to end up buying most, if not all of them. They're going to get into bed with all the DSOs and all of the corporations, and the independent practice is slowly going to be weeded out of these insurance companies. And so that is why this is so important right now. And it's slow, it's quiet, it's not overt. It's happening, but it's happening right underneath our nose, and we need to put up a flag. We need to put up the banner and make sure everyone's aware of what's going on so they can plan for it. The real cost of staying in the network is just going to get more difficult and more difficult. Like you said, they're going to ask us to continue to compromise our own care, in order for us to try to convince us that it's a better benefit. But in actuality, it's going to be kind of this slow death for the modern dental practices. This isn't the same industry that it was 5 or 10 years ago. This is an absolute different industry, and it's changing. And you need to decide what you want to do, how you're going to combat this, because it's not going to get any better.
Totally. Yeah, to add evidence to that, I don't know how many people know about this. There was a pretty large group. It's not a group practice. It's just um, a collaborative group. It's almost like a glorified study club down in Utah. That earlier this year they got together. There's about 250 of the docs that belong to this group, and they're all represented by the same attorney. I think that's the common thread by that. And they went to one of the insurance companies and said, listen, as a group, we'd like to renegotiate our rates, our reimbursements. And if you won't, which they historically have not, they said, if you won't, then we will exit. And uh, that insurance company fired back and said, this is collusion. Matter of fact, we're so angry that we're cutting you all out of our program, that we're kicking you out and you're no longer preferred providers. They sent a really scathing letter threatening all sorts of stuff. They were unsuccessful in pursuing collusion because each one of them was represented separately under a separate contract with this attorney, and the attorney was way ahead of the game on this one, which was awesome. But just the fact that that was their whole thing, was to fire back, not to say, yeah, let's go to the table and actually like talk about what your guys' needs are as our partners, because that's their words they like to use. Is insurance companies love to call us partners, which in my webinar I talked a lot about, like, okay, well, what makes a good partner? Maybe is it a good fit for you? Maybe it is, depending on what your core values are and what your needs are, and et cetera. But for most people, would you say that the insurance company is a good partner? I don't know. That's debatable.
Yeah, no, the storm isn't coming, right? I mean, it's already here, right? And I think that maybe it came slowly, and maybe we're not recognizing it. But the new write-offs, the burnouts, because you're working more, getting reimbursed less, the reimbursement cuts, these are the new normal unless you chart a different course. Now, the problem with this, and I think why most people hesitate on this, is because staying in network, it feels safe. And it feels safe. And I think that's really difficult. And, unless you realize that it's costing you more than just money, it's costing you really your purpose, who you are, why you're working, what you're doing. You're compromising so much more than just your income by staying in network. But the problem is that it feels safe, right? There's so many that you're scared to leave, right? I'm going to lose all my patients, right? Everyone's going to leave. And I think that's a very realistic fear. If you've built a practice dependent upon the insurance companies bringing all your patients to you, and you haven't done anything within your practice to try to create those relationships to retain your patients, that may be a real fear that needs to be addressed before you think about leaving.
Yeah, totally. I think there needs to be, and I keep deferring back to the webinar I did. I think that any office that is under multiple PPO contracts needs to stop and reassess and just look and say, okay, well, what's the true impact that these contracts are having on my practice? What's the real impact it's having on the people? What's the impact it's having on my income? Because there's a lot of hidden costs that go into those contracts. Not only are you writing off a certain amount, every day, you actually are your overhead's not changed. So you brought up the overhead thing. The Levin Group did a report at the beginning of the year that showed that since COVID, we've seen a increase of overhead upward as much as 20%. So that's a lot in 4 or 5 years to go up, is this huge overhead increase of 20%. Well, you're still paying for all of that, the staff, supplies, all of that, while reimbursements are staying stagnant. So the more you sign up with, the more contracts that you're under, the more times you're submitting, these claims. working under these contracts, the more hit you're going to take. It's going to dig into a higher percentage. The problem that exists is that most offices don't know how to dissect and see the impact, and um, uh, there has to be some data that comes through to be able to see what that impact looks like. But on top of that, you think about the impact on team morale. What happens when I know a lot of offices, and I'm not advocating for this, but I know a lot of offices are built around, doing a bonus system. Well, there comes a point where you can't bonus anymore because your BAM, or however you decide to bonus, is unrealistic now because your overhead is so high. What about all the work that goes into the additional peripheral work that comes with a higher patient load? We seek for a higher patient load, but what if that higher patient load, the reimbursement rates are so low that now your margins make it so that you're just working to work? You're not working for profit anymore. You're just doing it to do it. And then what does that affect in the patient experience? You have to take a look at that and what happened in the medical model. The medical model has basically squeezed out any family practitioners because nobody can afford to go into family practice anymore. And now we see it where, you see a mid-level provider when you go into a hospital or a doctor's office, because that's the only ones that can make it work, carrying, the debt load from school and everything else. Well, that's the way this is going. And so with a lower reimbursement rate, you have to have a higher patient. Ryan talks about this all the time. There's only two ways to increase revenue, and that's either more appointments, more procedures, or increase your dollar amount, your reimbursement rate. And so if your reimbursement rate goes down, you have to see more patients. Well, what does that do to the patient experience? What does that do to the morale and group, employees, making them run around like chickens with their heads cut off? Do you get to have that interpersonal relationship and build those relationships of trust that were so important and have been really, dentistry's been founded on that. It's why dentistry was considered one of the most trusted professions for years. We've slipped from that. We're no longer, number one in that position. And I think it's in part due to the movement of high patient load, high turnover, just trying to squeeze in as many patients as possible and losing those interpersonal relationships and experiences.
So let's talk about we've talked about that there's so many negative things about staying in network. I mean, we know that. We talked about some of the myths. We talked about some of the things that probably aren't true, like like if you leave, you're gonna lose all your patients. We talked about what actually happens, and so forth. So let's say that one of our listeners then wants to actually exit. Let's say, okay, we understand the problem. This is an issue. I've been feeling it as well. I can see this problem. How do you do it? How does one go about doing this? Because this is a very daunting task for a lot of people. We talked about a lot of the fears that you have. You're going to lose all your patients. Your staff is going to have fears as well, meaning, hey, if we lose patients, am I even going to have a job, or are you going to have to fire me?
Yeah.
What is a strategy that works for? And this could be a long discussion and podcast in itself. But briefly, what are kind of a couple steps that one could take if they're going to think about leaving an
Yeah,
industry?
we probably should do a podcast on how to exit, right? I think that would be a good podcast. That's a one we ought to line up. Maybe we'll do that one next. Just because, like you said, it's so involved. To me, it's two part, right? First of all, you have to, like I said, you need to see if it's a good partner. So for some situations, insurance can actually be a good fit. I'm not saying that every office it's a bad fit. If you operate with a low overhead, for example, if you have the ability to uh, navigate, the all the increases in overhead that are happening right now. There are a lot of practices that operate with a low overhead, and sometimes it's a pedo practice or another specialty. Sometimes it's just the practice is built for high volume, and that's what it's designed to do. There are places for these things. I immediately think of a practice, a big group practice down in Arizona that I know about. That's their whole model, is to work off of high volume, transient patients, and so for them it works fantastic. But the second part of this is you have to get the data and be able to evaluate and look at the impact. if you don't know the impact that the insurance is having, or if you're under multiple contracts, you don't know the impact that each contract is having on your practice, you don't know where to start. And at best, it's a crapshoot. So you really need to start weeding out and find out which in contracts are high impact and which ones are lower impact to your practice. And it's data, data, data. So we're back there talking about data again, and being able to look and say, okay, what is the impact of dropping X, Y, and Z insurance companies and contracts? What is that going to do to my practice? What's the true impact? And I think you have to look at it and make the assumption that if you exit one of those contracts, that you're going to lose all the patients. You won't, but you need to look at it and evaluate it like you would. And I think that's really important that you said it at the beginning of the podcast, you have to plan for the worst scenario and look at that. Some offices, somewhere along the line, either an office manager, maybe a prior owner, maybe the current owner, they were trying to grow the practice. So they just signed up with every contract under the sun, every insurance under the sun. And those are offices that really need to stop and take a look and go, okay, which ones can I start eliminating? And this isn't, I don't recommend going in guns blazing and just terminating every contract and exiting every insurance company that you're with. That can be that can be career suicide. So, you have to be smart and methodical about it, but it really comes down to finding the right data, and then there's some, we kind of alluded to this as well. There's some legal, considerations that come with this. What are you going to go about it correctly? You need to make sure that, you're informing your patients. The insurance company is going to need some heads up. Each company has a different amount of time that they need to be told before you exit. And then you should be able to build up, as you're getting ready. If you're going to leave, especially if you're leaving a lot of them, you have to be able to look and say, okay, how can I bolster my current patient base? What am I doing that's going to help to make sure that they stay loyal to my office? And then what are some ways to maybe increase some other revenue or attract your ideal patient in? And that's something that we haven't even touched on yet, Jared. We haven't even talked about the avatar, the ideal patient profile, and like getting into that. But yeah, man, there's a lot that has to go into this whole thing. And so it is daunting. It is scary, like you said. And I think that just the idea of, oh my gosh, I'm going to lose all my patients, that myth alone is enough to put the brakes for most people. I mean, I know it's been, as we've exited it, that's a scary thing and it's a real concern.
Yeah, as these people are thinking about this and thinking about exiting, like I said, it's a daunting task. There's a lot of steps, a lot of things to do, which we're not going to cover all in this podcast. But like you said, you need to start with the data and the information. Do an audit. Just do an audit of your PPO contracts, of the insurances that you're contracted with. Go through and see which ones you're writing the most off of and see if you're okay with that or not. And then if not, then you can start to make the decision of, now what do I need to do? You take into consider the financial, the legal considerations and ramifications of doing that. And what we're feeling and seeing right now, and this is our mentality that we want with our whole team, is that you're not going to lose all your patients when you leave the PPO, but you are going to lose the ones that never really valued you to begin with, right? And you're also making room or space for the ones who do or who are going to value you in the future. And that's what you're talking about with the creating your avatar. Right now, your dental companies have created your avatar for you. You've adopted that avatar. You haven't designed that at all. You're currently living somebody else's design for the practice that you want to run. And so this is just allows you, it's scary, but it allows you to take a step back and create what you want to do. Using Dental Intel and Bloom are two great tools for you to work on gathering this data and this information. And then also collaborating with experts, collaborating with people who have done this before, getting involved with a group, talking to people who have exited or who are currently exiting, talk with us. We'll share all the strategies that we're using and what we found to be the best. There's a lot of podcasts out there that are great as well, and people. But at the end of the day, you're whether you're considering to leave or not, you got to realize that it's going to be more profitable, maybe not more productive, but more profitable. It could be more profitable for you when you leave the insurance company. And the profit it's not greed. It's not like you want or need more money. profit allows you to grow. It allows you to reward your team and allows you to serve your patients with your full capacity, right? We just had a couple complaints recently. A guy who has been a patient for a while, and he actually left a little review and said, I only got a couple seconds to talk with Dr. Hill as he came in. Like, I didn't feel like I was valued or taken care of. And at that point in time, it's because I had to do two other exams and I had two patients waiting in the chair because I had to jam pack my schedule to be productive in order to pay my team and to pay myself as much as what we think what we're valued. So it's taking a step back and evaluating that and really understanding what the financial consequences are and also the impact that it's going to have on your patients and your practice. So it seems difficult, to kind of close this up. What is it? I guess it's always good to see. We always preach, creative vision. What's your 10-year plan, 3-year plan, 1-year plan. Dan, what does it look like on the other side of the storm? Right? Like right now we're in the eye of the storm, right? Like it's not coming, it's here. We're in that. Like, what does it look on the other side? And what kind of hope and confidence can we give these, these other practice owners on what they can expect from that?
Yeah, I mean the reason I called it navigating the storm is because I feel like insurance, when you live in the insurance world, you're just subject to just all the winds, and you just get chucked around. It's like not having a rudder on a boat, and you're just getting hucked and chucked, and it just trying to navigate through all the changes and the things they want you to do. You're subject to so much. You don't really have a lot of control on what you can and can't do within your office. They are dictating care a lot of times, either directly or indirectly. They're controlling more of your destiny as far as like, okay, what about my retirement plan? What about other things I want to do? Like maybe, I'm wearing my Tanzania jersey right now. What about going and doing things where you're doing humanitarian aid that it can be limiting? We've got a lot of offices that are like, oh, I'd love to go to Tanzania, but I can't afford to take that much time off, that kind of thing. And so they just dictate so much. And the other thing, Jared, that I think is like, I was talking to a contractor friend the other day. Contractors can't wrap their heads around what we're doing with insurance. They're like, you take how much of a hit? They're like, why would you do that? Like they don't offer some discount to somebody, they don't sign on with somebody to go and, build more, do whatever they're doing. They can't wrap their heads around it. And I think it's funny that we subject ourselves to this level of servitude, because we find it necessary, or we can't survive if we don't do it, and so, what's on the other side of that? I think you have the opposite, right? You have clarity, you have confidence, and finally you have margins that matter, right? So you have now the ability to take the proverbial till and control, your own destination and where you're going to land. And I get it. It's scary. I mean, we've done this twice now, where we've exited, and it is terrifying. I do want to share a quick story about one of our patients, been a longtime patient here, been very loyal, and they love you. Like, they're huge Dr. Hill fans. And uh, our front desk was telling me, listen, we're exiting. They were talking about it, and he couldn't wrap his head around it either. He's like, why would you guys take such a hit? He's like, I get it. And he's like, well, for me, it's worth it to pay a little bit extra to stay here because I love this office. This is who I trust. This is where, this is where I'm staying. And that's cool, because again, we plan to lose everybody, but you're not going to. You're going to have those patients that love you and love the services you provide, and you've built that relationship. And it's important to know that there are, we haven't even talked about Bloom Cloud or Dental Menu or any of those other companies that are out there to help build your patient benefit programs, which I think is paramount. But yeah, the bottom line is what's on the other side of all this is a much more calm, serenity, control, ability to make unfettered decisions, and not having, someone behind the curtain pulling the strings and pushing their own prerogative, forcing your hand in certain situations. So yeah, it's a lot more freedom, a lot more freedom.
Yeah, maybe a closing thought that I have, Dan, is as we've talked with all these dentists who have already navigated the storm and have decided to leave these insurance companies, there's been a common thread amongst all of them. And that common thread is regret.
Hmm.
But it's not regret that they left. It's regret that they didn't leave sooner than they
Yeah.
did, right? So they are all so so grateful that they did, and they all endured a little bit of a storm during it and maybe right after it. But now
Totally.
that they're a year later, 2 years out, 3 years out, they all say it's the best thing they've ever done and regret that they didn't do it sooner. So there's, as we're going through this, we're we're going through it. Like we're in the eye of the storm right now, and that's why we're podcasting about it, because it's close and near and dear to us, and keep following us through this journey. We'll give you updates on how it's going, and like I said, next week we'll let's probably think about sharing some of our strategies of what we're doing and how we're going about it, and I think that'll be a very valuable podcast.
Awesome. Good stuff. Well, I think this has given. I mean, we've chewed on this for so long, so hopefully we've given some fat to chew on and some food for thought moving forward. And appreciate everybody for joining us, and we will see you guys next time.
Thanks, Sam. See you guys.